I'm Max Dyckhoff. I've been at Naughty Dog for about 2 years. I joined about a year before we shipped The Last of Us. And I started off on Thug AI before going on to the Ellie AI, which I would love to present to you today and show you our reasoning behind Ellie and the systems we used and the general mindset we got into. I hope it's interesting, and I hope you love it. Incidentally, the previous slide's meant to animate. It looks really cool, but I'm sorry. Okay, so Ellie is, in my opinion, the star of The Last of Us. She's a great character. She's new in this world, much like the player is. She is not world-weary like Joel, the protagonist. She's seeing everything outside the military city for the first time, much like the player is. She's afraid of the scary things, much like we as players are too. She sees violence and she's disgusted by it. And to this end, she's a really important character in the game. She's, to me, the real character in the game that you should be talking to and thinking about. When we went to build her, we knew there were all these things we needed to avoid. Everyone's played a lot of games with companion AI, which sucks, and it has the escort quest problems, where you always feel like you have to save this character and make sure they're safe and do things to help them out. We didn't want that. We wanted to make sure that she was someone that helped you out, and she wasn't annoying, you never hated her, you never swore at her, all this kind of stuff. Otherwise, it would be broken. So today, I'm going to walk through the systems we used to make this a reality. There's not that much. It's actually pretty basic stuff, but I hope to give you an idea of the inside of what we did to develop this. Okay, so the press demo we had at the start of January 2013, it was the first time we were ever going to show The Last of Us to people who were going to talk about it to the public. And this was it was a single encounter about 20, 30 minutes long through a space in the bottom of the tilted building. And at this time, the buddy AI wasn't acceptable. This was 5 months before we had to ship. And for the entire encounter, Tess and Ellie had to stay back. They did the old gaming trope of, we'll stay here and you clear out the area for us. And we realized this wasn't what we wanted. We wanted them to be there to participate in the fight, to add an emotional impact to the fight, and to really make the infected not just a horror because they're attacking you, but because you were scared for your friends that were there with you. We wanted these characters to be there with you throughout the entire encounter. So they were scripted. We didn't want this. We also realized, well, shit, we have a whole game, not just one encounter. We should probably get the AI working for the whole thing. So I came in, and I took everything down, basically. We had pretty comprehensive AI, but it wasn't where we wanted it to be. So I was going to go back to basics and start from scratch 5 months before ship. It's a good idea. Fortunately, we had a great number of systems in place. Like, the locomotion was great, animation was great, pathfinding was awesome. All this stuff was great. It was just building like the core behaviors and skills we wanted to get these guys to use on the way. First of all, I disabled combat, and instead I wanted to focus on the one thing which we thought was going to be the absolute core to it, and that is sticking close to the player and staying away from the bad guys. So even if they couldn't do anything beyond that, so long as they were close to you at all times, this was good in our book. I concentrated on Ellie's relationship with Joel. Like, these are the two main characters. They're in your face for 16 to 20 hours of the game, and we wanted to work out how they were going to work together and how, as a player, you cared about Ellie and what she was going to give back to you. So Bruce and I we just spent ages, Bruce Straley, game director, we'd spend ages just talking about what we thought she was going through and where she was coming from in the encounter this time. So I mentioned the first thing we want to do is keep her really close to the player. There's a lot of good reasons for this. They're going to run into fewer problems with enemy AI, and that's the number one thing we did here. I'm going to talk about this later. Additionally, though, if she's far away from the player, you get a sense that you're alone in the world. There's this huge encounter space. It's messy. It's a destroyed building. If you lose track of Ellie, you start to forget she's there. You want to remember she's there, and you care about her, and she's helping you out and being useful. So once she's staying close to you, we also wanted her to have some utility. So if she's just staying close to you, she's going to be an escort quest. It's the WoW thing where you're walking through a forest and you get attacked periodically, and you've just got to keep walking on with this character following you. And if she has utility, she does stuff, you're going to care about her even more. Jeez. Beyond this, we then wanted to make her interesting. So even if she's fighting and all this kind of stuff, she's got to be an interesting character. So we created a huge suite of ambient animations for her to play, non-combat conversation tracks, and a load of combat vocalizations which progress throughout the duration of the game. There's also a bullet point here, which I should have made much bigger. We also really wanted to not cheat. It was always one of our driving things. We didn't want to cheat in this game. The player is in this world. He's grounded. He has a set of rules to adhere to. We really wanted Ellie to adhere to the same rules, and we wanted to increase her believability and by not cheating. Like if we start bouncing her around and teleporting and doing all this stuff, she's an unbelievable character. We wanted her to be there the whole time realistically. So first up, we're going to talk about following the player, how we did this. It says in my notes how we did it enjoyably. I don't see what that makes sense. So there's a lot of reasons keeping her close to the player. So primarily, if she is on the same space as the player, she is by definition no more stupid than the player. So if the player gets in trouble, then he's never going to blame this on Ellie. If she gets seen, he's been seen too. They're in the same damn space. So if she is as close to you as possible, if she's just a couple of meters away from you and she gets seen, the player is going to attribute this failure to himself, not to Ellie. This was really key to us. We wanted never anything to be blamed on Ellie, always on the player. Additionally, if she's close, she can act as a really good dialogue input to you. I'm going to cover this pretty detailedly later, but she can trigger dialogue based on the situation the two of you are in, like where your location is. If it's unsafe, she can tell you to move, etc. And there's actually a couple of sequences in the game where she's no longer there. And because of this, when she's no longer there, you feel left out. You feel like some of your skills are no longer available, and you feel a bit more alone in the world, which really helps. I mean, it changes up the style of the gameplay. It also helps build the relationship with Ellie. So when she's returned to you, you think, holy shit, I'm glad she's back. So we're going to jump straight into one of the small technical things I have. It's basically how we went into the following. So we set up a follow region around the player. So the player is just a point in space with a navigation polys on. We data define these regions around him. It's basically a wide arc behind, in front, beside, whatever, with some set of parameters saying how wide it is, how long it is, and then some additional movement parameters we threw into it, like how quickly they should move there, how much history they should have to stay in the same kind of location. It's pretty basic, and ultimately, we ended up with dozens of these across the game. So you'd think, well, we have the one follow region, this is cool for the player, but no, it turns out that throughout the game, the encounters change very slightly. The space is bigger, the space is smaller, there's more buddies, there's fewer buddies, there's more enemies. And to this end, we had to tighten the regions for every single encounter we were in. So once we have this follow region set up, we use raycasts. And we fire out a fan of raycasts through this region, figure out intelligent places to stand, make sure they're not going to look stupid. And then once we've done that, we rate, sort, and pick one of them to go to. So here's a little animation, ISO standard player character. And so he's in a space. And right next to him, sorry, this is behind him, this is the follow region I defined. So this is a partial donut behind you, some range, some thickness, bunch of angles. Here's a block we want the buddies to avoid. So first up, so we're actually firing nav mesh raycasts here. So these are on the navigation polys. This is making sure that there is a clear line between the player and these positions that the buddy can walk along if necessary. So we fire out a fan of these, actually probably twice this number in practice. If it hits something, then we say there's no good standing there, obviously. That makes sense. So we now have these candidate follow positions. These 4 positions here, we're like, okay, these are 4 pretty cool positions. What more can we find out about them? Next up, we're going to fire a ray forwards. So this is basically, if I go stand here, am I going to be looking at a wall? Now, you could say, well, we could go stand here and not look at the wall, but even then, there's this weird, it just feels wrong. If you're there standing right next to a wall and you kind of nudge the buddy up to it, it's this weird separation issue. And if you walk around with a friend, you'll find you never would even do that. You'd never stand next to a wall, etc. So we're now going to reject one at the 7 o'clock position. These ones here, these are the forward positions. They're clear. That's cool. So 7 o'clock's gone. And we now fire 3 more rays. Now, these ones are a little nuanced, and I'm going to mention them on the next slide. But we're basically now checking if we can get from this forward position back to the player again. And we have 3 positions at the end. So the next slide is going to go into that 3rd ray again. I'm going to mention that more depth. So here, there's a smaller block. This could be a wall, it could be a fence, it could be a doorway, whatever. So we're going to do the same thing. We fire the rays back, generate the candidate positions, fire rays forwards, check they're not standing in front of a wall. And here you see the one at the 7 o'clock position is clear to walk in front of. Now, this was originally how we had it, and it actually looks really stupid if she goes and stands there, because you're not in the same room as her, essentially. If she goes and stands there, she can see you, that's fine, but in practice, in an actual space, if she starts moving, then her momentum is going to carry her, so this wall is between you. So this 3rd ray we have says, actually, no, this point's stupid, don't go there. We reject that, so she's not going to go to point 7. So this forces her into the same room or the same field or the same garden as you. And that's that. Boom. So here is an actual space in Billstown, the debug stuff we have in game for one of the ambient setups we have. You see all the rays being fired around. You see the orange candidate positions. And if you actually look at it closely, it has the rating values on there too, which are all magic numbers to do with angles and target values and shit. And you can actually see here, though, something else kind of interesting. I took the screenshot slightly too late, and the position she's on is now technically invalid. The forward ray, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a red ray straight forward from her. It's hitting something. She shouldn't be standing there. Because when the player originally generated this, he was somewhere else. It was cool. But she's moved there, and we don't want her to move away. Like, it's no longer a valid position, but it still makes sense for her to stand there. So that brings us on to the next thing, which is like the intentionality of our movement and how we want to move. So buddies, you often see, are very bouncy, and companion characters in general, they move around a lot. They try and get out of your way. You're not quite sure what the hell they're doing. You see them move from A to B, change cover, you're not quite sure why. So we were always, whenever we saw her do this kind of thing, we would break into the locomotion log for her, see what was up, and then start putting in conditions to say, no, don't move. Add some hysteresis here, only move on these conditions. So it breaks down that ultimately she has, she will pick a point, and she will be very happy to stay there until like it gets bad to be there, essentially. So if it's being threatened or if it's too far from the player, that's the only kind of time she's going to decide to move. We don't want her moving awkwardly. Additionally, it's a minor point, but we have these speed ranges for the movement. So once she's picked a position to move to, she's n meters away from it, and we say, well, you should run, you should walk, you should sprint. That makes sense, but I'm going to cover that slightly later. So you're never going to run a short distance, you're never going to walk a long distance. This is important when the player starts moving. So if the player is moving through space, we have to figure out how she is going to follow the player. So we actually use exactly the same system. We have this follow region, and we're generating follow points behind him. And we're not doing any like tweening or anything like this to figure out which one she should be on. We're just picking a new point every frame. Now, we throw in some weightings to these things to make sure she's not doing stupid things. We want her to stay on the same side of the player, so she's not flip-flopping behind you. We want her to stay behind or in front if necessary. And we then got onto an issue where you're running through a space, and she has this point she's generating, and the player has fully analog movement. So he's moving at 17.3 meters a second, and she can't move anything other than 10 or 20. So we actually start speed scaling, and we speed scale her so there is this range of distances which she's going to run in, and we want her to stay in the middle of this. So if she is too far forward, she's going to speed scale back her animations by up to 25% until she gets to the middle, and she's going to like oscillate around the middle. So as the two of you are running together, she's going to be oscillating very slightly, but you never can tell. She's never actually changing the movement mode from walk to run to sprint. So you see her always running with the player. Another thing to do with moving is dodging. So all games have this, where there's a buddy character, you walk at them, and they're going to dodge out of your way. We had this, and we decided we didn't really like it, because in practice, if you and your friend are standing in a room and you start walking at them, they're going to think you're an asshole. So in fact, what happens in reality is you walk around them. So there's two of you, you walk around them. And you notice players will actually do the same thing. They will inherently start walking around the buddy instead of straight at them. So she will stand her ground if she's there first. If she gets there first, she's not going to move out of your way. The player will walk around them, and if for some reason they can't, then at the very last second, we're going to make her dodge. So there are times she's on a staircase, she can't move out of the way, you can't move around her. She's going to dodge out of the way. We start firing pathfinding raycasts again. We try and go sideways, we try and go away from the player, and then finally towards the player. And then, very importantly, we also complain about it at the end. So you've just pushed her, and she does a little reaction thing, and she says, hey, get out of my way, or something much more girly. All right. I mentioned cheating as well. Now, you could say, well, Max, you want them to follow closely, just teleport them. Well, no, we don't want to do that. It's the obvious solution, but there's a lot of reasons not to. And funnily, the first reason for it came from our sound guys. I think it was Phil Kovacs. He was like, well, if they teleport, you're not going to hear their footsteps anymore. And this, to me, it made perfect sense, but most people here probably don't play the games with sound turned on. And it's true, if they're 20 meters away and then they're suddenly 10 meters away from you, the footsteps change completely. We can't really blend that very nicely. So that was number one reason for not teleporting. Number two is, it's just fucking weird. Like, you're looking one direction, and she's over here, and you move around a little bit, and suddenly she's over there, and it just feels uncanny. You can do as many cool conditions as you want to, but it's always a little weird that they've moved. There's that Watson video where Watson's teleporting around. There's also just ultimately, I didn't want to do it on principle. We're trying to make a character here. She can't teleport in the world of The Last of Us, so we're not going to let her teleport. It doesn't make sense. We want to polish all the stuff we have in our arsenal instead of cheating. We never teleport her, except for scripted reasons, but that doesn't count. So yeah, we're not going to cheat. She's meant to look sad, I guess. Okay, so that's ambient following. We now have combat following. So in combat, you're going to be in cover. And there's a lot of problems with cover, which I'm going to go very quickly through this. It's kind of boring. But there's a little bit of how stuff works in Naughty Dog engines. So we have these things called action packs. I'm sure most of your engines have the same thing. You have an environment. It has a nav mesh telling them polygons where they can move. And we want some meta information saying how they can interact with the world. So we call these things action packs. It's just a locator and some metadata with an animation set or something like that. There are three main types we have. There's cinematic action packs, annoyingly called caps, because we actually rarely use them. But that's basically one or more NPCs can go up and interact with something in the environment, pull out a drawer, open a cupboard, whatever. We have traversal action packs, which are the jumping, climbing kind of things. So like ladders, balance beams, vaulting over windows, etc. Then we have cover APs, which I wish were called caps. But cover APs are the ones where they get into cover, and it's stand, crouch, crouch over, crouch sideways, and it has the frustrum saying where it will be hidden from, etc. It's not very exciting. Here are, this is just a little, so you can see what they look like in the world. There's two vault action packs here. So these are traversal action packs. They are, it's potentially hard to see, but there's basically a green line and a locator on top of the window, and you can see the text says, hey, this is a vault action pack. The NPC can pathfind to this, play the animation, jump over the window. And here you have some cover action packs. So this is a space in Hunter City, and you see the orange and blue dongles, and that basically says, yep, you can take cover on the left here, you can take cover standing right here. In fact, in this slide, you can see what I'm about to talk about, where up at the top of the car, there's actually no cover action pack right there. And this is because these cover action packs are generated by tools. And the tools, they're awesome, but they're not 100% correct. And our world is this fractured, broken landscape, and it's not flat edges and surfaces. And so frequently you get something which is 1 centimeter too damn short, and so they can't generate a cover action pack on it. And the designers can go in and place these by hand, but it's a pain, and it takes time. And more importantly, there's a lot of spaces where they don't want to do it. There's no thugs in it. There's only infected. The infected don't use action packs, so why should the designers be going in and putting these things in there? So we also have a whole space, the tilted building, which is tilted by 30 degrees, and that was really awesome for generating cover action packs because it threw all our math out. Curses. So yeah, generally for regular NPCs, that's cool. We don't care. They can take cover most places. The player doesn't notice if they're not covering on this corner of the car versus the other one. But in the case of the player can take cover anywhere. And he uses the system where he fires rays and looks at the walls, and we're going to talk about that in a second. And we need the buddy to be right next to the player at all times. We need to make sure there is always a cover action pack within 1 to 0 meters of the player, which is just not feasible. So we generate what we call runtime cover APs. These are a structure. We call them magic cover APs, actually, but they're runtime, essentially. There's 2 or 3 of them they generate at any one time, and they go through the system, locomotion, animation, everything exactly the same as a regular cover AP, but they're at runtime. We put them wherever we want. And the reason we don't do this for everybody is because they're super expensive. Because we start firing rays from the leader. We fire 80 every frame against collision for everybody. And this is actually kind of what the leader does, the leader being the player, but he does it at different ranges and stuff. So first up, we go and fire this ring of rays around the player at crouch height. This is trying to find collision geometry nearest, which we could potentially hide against. We also gather these things called cover edges in the world. So cover edges are generated by the tools, and they're actually ultimately what are used to generate cover APs. And they're basically a long edge in the world, which we think there is a wall above. And they're very finicky as well. But now if we combine the two, we have this really cool data structure which covers the whole world, hopefully. Little procedural cover generation animation. So ISO standard player character, little wall on the left. We're going to fire out, this is only 20 rays, I think we fire 80 ultimately. Fire out these rays, see where we hit. We get some hits, and we notice, we sort of group them into different colors here, but we group them into different surfaces based on the angle, the height, we don't actually have the surface information, and we also don't care about the surface information. This could be two non-uniform surfaces, but we kind of want to unify them into one surface here. We group them up, and we say, hey, this is an edge. Maybe Ellie could take cover on this edge. Now, because of the fun with angles and rays, obviously you actually get pretty bad coverage the first time, but we're doing this every damn frame. So the next frame, you move a little bit, and you get better coverage. And we store all this over time, and build up this picture around the world. So now we have all these procedural cover edges. We go and rate them based on a bunch of classes like too far from the leader, the threat distances, the dots to targets, etc. Basically seeing, can this edge be seen by or potentially seen by an enemy? We don't actually fire rays to the edge. That would be really expensive. We then go and pick what we consider the best one, which is typically the one closest to the player. And we generate this runtime cover AP. So you have an edge, you have the player near it, and we say, okay, we're going to put right here is where we want the buddy. We generate the structure there, and we throw it through the locomotion system as a regular AP. So this is actually a screenshot showing the actual procedural cover in the game. It's super messy, but basically there's orange lines along cover all around you. It has this yellow line jutting out, which is the normal, and then a bunch of rating information. That rating is actually pretty cool. You can go look at the slides later. It has all the values we're looking at, like dots, and there's a magic number, which is super good. And ultimately, she likes that green one down there. So she goes, generates her cover AP on this green one, and she sticks to the wall right there. There's actually a bad guy in the background right there. He's kind of hidden by the bush, but you're actually hiding from him. Okay, so we're generating these cover APs. We're moving to them intelligently. And we wanted to add this. Okay, so there was in Uncharted, we had this problem with cover APs with buddies being in them. The buddy would be in a cover AP on a corner. The player wants to get there because it's the best place to shoot. So the buddy pops out and runs somewhere else. This is really annoying, especially if they pop out and they get seen, or I don't know, they pop out and bump into the player. So our animator, Almudena, comes and generates this cover share set where Joel takes Ellie under his wing and puts his arm over her on a backpack and shoots over her, all this kind of cool stuff. And it looked awesome. And it built the relationship between the two characters. This was a father-daughter relationship you're looking at. It was her fragility, his bulkiness, etc. And she just hid under there. It was awesome. And because of an awesome bug I wrote, at one point she actually entered cover through Joel, which was pretty cool. But we realized it looked good, apart from the clipping. And so we modified the animation set and had it so she actually would open up. Joel would open up and let her in, which meant that now, suddenly, we could just generate a cover AP exactly where the player is. So at all times, we can just put a cover AP on the player and have Ellie go to that place, this was perfect. You are now on the same spot as Ellie. She's no more stupid than the player is. Boom, cover share. Yeah, I love that shot. So, also, once she's snuggled under your arm, we open up additional dialogue if she's within a meter of you. So she can actually say things like, she can notice that you've almost been seen by some bad guys and say, hey, Joel, we should move from here. Or if a clicker just looked over and almost caught the two of you but didn't quite get it, she can go, holy shit, that was close. And this little vocalizations in the world really help build the connection between the two of you on this bit of cover. Okay, so we know how they're going to follow us. We know how they're going to stay close to us in combat and out of combat. The next thing is to actually get them useful in combat. At this point, we had the buddy following the players around. This was maybe 2-3 weeks into our development of this thing. The buddies were following the player around. They were staying in cover, but they were pretty useless in the world. They weren't shooting anybody. They weren't doing anything like that. So we're going to focus again on Ellie, but this is applicable to all the buddies we were working on. So number one, we wanted them to support the player rather than go off and do their own fighting. The first part of our combat was actually have them do whatever the hell they want and use the same skills and behaviors as the thug AI did. It was pretty cool, and they would go and fight. But we realized that it didn't make sense because the player's off doing his own thing and Tess is off murderizing all these guys in the corner, which changed the makeup of the encounter. There were 10 guys, she kills 4 of them, it's a different encounter suddenly. We also didn't want to have the will wait here for you. We wanted them always with you doing stuff. I mentioned briefly, but we wanted them not to affect the difficulty curve of an encounter. So if a buddy happens to be more effective in one place than another place and takes out some guys, we don't want to change how difficult this is based on what the designers are putting in there. They've already balanced it. We want to not change that if possible. We also want the player to notice what's going on. If you don't notice it, then you just you don't know what they're doing. You feel they're ineffective. We want them to be effective, nothing else. And of course, the buddy, Ellie, has no gun, and she can't just follow you around looking like a tree. So the first thing we did in our E3 2013-2012 gameplay trailer, there's this moment where Ellie throws a brick at a thug, and she says, "Hey, asshole," and it knocks him out. And the crowd cheered, so we were like, okay, we should put that back in. That's pretty cool. So it's actually really easy to do, and the implementation was very simple. The animation was there, we had the movement and the vocalizations, but all we needed to do was figure out when to do it. And when to do it, and a couple of details. So first of all, we originally also had her going around picking up bottles and bricks. And this was kind of cool, and she would hunt them down and like TK her arm to them, or IK her arm and pick them up and throw them. But the player never noticed this. We actually have her magic bottles out of nowhere and just throw them. Number two is when to do it. And the important thing about when to do it is we wanted her to be saving the player. We need to figure out when it is that she's saving the player. So this is one time we kind of cheat a little bit, but it's basically we hook into the enemy perception system, and we figure out, are they about to see the player? Like, are they in skills which I'm trying to uncover the player? Is their perception in the right kind of direction? Is the player where they think he is? And if so, she's going to stand up and throw a bottle. She's going to try and position first, get a line of sight, and throw this bottle. And it's really cool, because the player can be out of ammo, can be hiding, can be really knuckled down, and suddenly this brick comes from off screen, knocks out the guy, you go and punch him and beat him up. And it builds the relationship with Ellie at this point, which is exactly what we're going for. Number two, my buddy Anthony talked this morning about the melee system, so I'm not going to do too much here, but we actually had enemies grab Ellie. So she's running around the world, we're like, okay, how can this be more interesting? She's just standing there bumping into NPCs the whole time. So now they can actually grab her. They'll grab onto her, they'll do this like cool little animation. And we had it so that the player would then, there's a little counter above the head, the player has to go save her. And this was terrible, because you're there fighting your own thing, and suddenly this timer appears for no reason of your own fault. And you have to run across the level, save her, and punch the guy. And then well, that was pointless, I'm doing my own fight. So we then step back and put in a bunch of animations for her to get away from the grapple herself. So she fights it off, pushes it off, and she actually backs up and is then non-targetable for a few seconds. We actually kept the requirement for the player to save the buddy occasionally, but we were very restrictive on when we would do this. So we would make sure that they were close, there was a good path to them, they were visible, so it wasn't, and the player wasn't also grappled. So you never felt like it was a burden to go and save her. You felt it was kind of cool, you had to go and save her, like, oh, I'm helping my friend. We also added the ability for her to save you. So you're sitting there mashing a button trying to get away from a bad guy, and she jumps in. I think she actually teleports here, which is bad, I'm sorry. She teleports a little bit if she's within range, so she can play her animation, run up and stab the guy in the back, but it's only a couple of meters, so it doesn't count. And this is great, because you just saved her, and then she comes and saves you, so again, in the future, you feel like I'm ready to save her again. I've got to say, it's actually some of the most rewarding gameplay we have. And the first time I saw it happen, I don't think I even knew that Anthony had put it in, and it just suddenly happened and kicked ass. So she's now fighting. She's not doing any combat fight like gunplay yet, but we wanted one more little thing to give her a bit more personality in the combat space. So we had this idea of gifting. There was one scripted encounter we already had in Winter at the beginning, where David would give you some ammo. Spoilers, I guess, sorry. He gives you some ammo and whatever, and you're very thankful for him, and you walk off. But we wanted Ellie to do this too, systematically. So we're like, okay, we already have balanced the entire game because we only have a month until ship. So everything's balanced, but we still want her to give you this ammunition and be useful. So we just tied into the existing drop system. So there's this cool thing in the background with a drop table, figuring out what ammo, health packs, collectibles guys should drop or should spawn in the world. And all we did was say, you know what, that's not going to spawn there, it's going to spawn on Ellie, and she's just going to give it to you. So this didn't change the balancing whatsoever. It just meant you got it through a different delivery mechanism. We also made sure that she didn't do it too often. The very first time we checked this in, I accidentally forgot to turn on a timer, and it was the day before a playtest. So the first playtest, there was a dude playing through this one space. He ran out of ammo way too early. And every 20 seconds, Ellie was like, here, have some ammo, have some ammo. This might help. Would you like some ammo? Hey, take this. So not only did this highlight that the encounter was broken ass because it was too difficult, but it devalued the use of what she was doing. Like, she wasn't being a useful character, she was being an ammo dispenser. So we didn't care about, we weren't thankful for it. We were just like, I've run out of ammo, can I have some more, please? So that was horrible. So we put a 15, 20, 30, 45-minute time on it, something huge. You value it a lot more if it happens rarely. Okay, what's this slide about? Yes, so they're in cover, sorry, you're in combat. We want them near the player at all times, if possible. We basically try and mirror what the player is doing as much as possible. So if the player is in cover, we're going to use the cover AP next to the player. If you're standing up, the buddies are going to stand up next to you with their guns out. And if we can't figure out what to do, we get in cover and hide and hope it looks good. The most important thing we came about positioning, though, was figuring out that they shouldn't be in front of you. It makes sense, but a lot of the time, there's no other way around it. So it's the only way out of a space. It's the only clear space in a room. But if they ever like encroach on being in front of you and in your mindset, it's actually kind of annoying. And this is at odds with our goal to keep them in your mind. But having them in front of you was not where we wanted them. We had them right next to you, but never in front of you. Stealth. So the game is a lot about stealth. There's a lot of audio gameplay in the game. And we needed to make sure that the buddies would never break stealth for you. This is a big thing. We've had questions about it. We're going to go into detail. Having them give away your location would be terrible. If you're trying to sneak and they shoot at the wrong time and you think, well, why the fuck were they shooting? I was trying to get away. You would hate them. So the first change we made here was actually we turned off all their desire to shoot. So they have a gun and it's out. And the thugs, the bad guys in the game, they are very trigger happy. At any time, they are just, the only thing holding them back from shooting is line of sight, essentially, and timing stuff, I guess. This didn't make sense for Ellie, so we actually reversed the logic here, and she never wants to shoot. She wants to not shoot her gun. This makes a lot of sense. She's a kid, she's a girl, she's a human being, she's not a horrible person. She doesn't want to be shooting her gun. So she never wants to shoot unless she's given weapons free, essentially. And weapons free happen when the player is in danger. Like if the player is being shot at, or if the player is in melee combat, or is trying to, is obviously trying to get away from a danger, then she's going to start shooting. And just flipping this little idea of you can shoot to you can't shoot really changed how she appeared in the game. And as far as stealth goes, it's the same thing. So if the player is not shooting and isn't threatened, then she's not going to be shooting back at all and not breaking your stealth. So one of the key things for making sure she's not shooting when you're getting away is modeling when the player has snuck away. What you can see here is what we call our entity perception system. You have a thug up on the left, and the little stick man is where he last saw the player. We've now moved a certain distance from here. We're far enough away that you've actually snuck away. Now, because you've snuck away, they don't know where you are. They have no idea where you are. Ellie's like, okay, we made it. So she's now in stealth mode, and this triggers her never going to shoot, absolutely. She's quiet, she starts whispering. You got away. Shooting. So we enabled gun usage, and even despite our restrictions on not wanting to do too much damage or to shoot too much, she was a killing machine, and it sucked. She was just taking people down all over the place. She did the same damage as the player. She was pretty accurate, but fortunately we have all the regular knobs. We have damage, accuracy, firing rate. And so we started looking at what we could do to tweak these. Now, damage, you can't tweak. If you put 3 bullets into a guy to kill him, and she has to take 20 to kill him, doesn't make sense in the world. That's cheating. So she has the same damage, give or take like a few percent. So what about fire rate and accuracy? Well, if you start modifying fire rates, and she's aiming a gun, and there's a guy charging her down, and she's not shooting, you think, well, she's in danger, why the hell isn't she shooting? And accuracy is the same problem. She's got some accuracy, like she's 5 feet away from a guy and can't shoot it. It doesn't look right if she's not shooting. So how do we balance this to make them able to shoot enough to put some damage out, but not be killing machines? So first up, we tweaked the fire rate and accuracy as much as we could. We lowered it, made them fire as slowly and as inaccurately as possible. It was still way too much. So we introduced this concept of like a nervous idle almost, where we dropped her fire rate way, way lower, but gave this nervous, like, I don't want to shoot kind of animation. And suddenly, the ridiculously low fire rate made sense. You could see that she was having a mental conflict with wanting to shoot just because of this animation we put on top of her. So we could go way below where we wanted to do. The other thing we added was that if you weren't going to see this damage, there was no point doing it. And this kind of makes sense, but if she's off screen and the bad guy's off screen, then we do 0 damage whatsoever. A lot of people think, well, you're going to realize she's not killing anybody. Ultimately, you don't. You're too busy in your own fights. And we also make sure on some timers that she will target someone on screen and shoot them and potentially kill them. So if she's off screen, she's going to be shooting bullets, being pretty accurate. You're going to hear the body impacts. You're going to hear her saying, take that, motherfucker. But she's not actually killing anybody. She's not changing the makeup of the encounter. She's not making things easier or harder for you. But then we have this timer to make sure she occasionally does go back on screen and do something, so she's not seeming ineffective. Then, I think I talked about that already. So we spent a lot of time just reviewing the playtest data, basically. Bruce and I were looking at it. And we realized there were some problems where the difficulty of an encounter would vary based on nothing that we couldn't discern what the problem was. There would be the same number of dudes with the player and the buddy with the same firing rates, just in 2 different spaces. And what it breaks down to is it's a continuous game. It's not this binary problem. Their size of spaces are different. They're better at taking cover. They are further away, so the shots are less damaging. So what it broke down to, unfortunately, was Bruce and me walking through all the game, looking at playtest details and tweaking the fire rates and damage just for every single encounter. There is no way I can overstate how much tuning is important to this game. We spent probably 1 month of the 4.5 months doing actual code, and then the rest of it tuning. Just tweaking values, looking at shit, looking at playtest results, and making sure it was right for every single space. So targeting, this is a little side note here, I guess. Originally, we have this really cool and intelligent targeting system with a couple of dozen, 3 dozen values for who we should be targeting, like the distance, a stickiness value, a dog pile value, I don't know, how handsome they are value. And what it would boil down to was they were breaking up, and the 3 on Ellie and 3 on the player, and it kind of sucked. So what we broke it down to was we got rid of all this, and everyone targets the player. Until we feel there's a bit too many, and then 1 guy will target a buddy, and then maybe 1 other guy. But most people just stick on the player. Now, this actually works better than you might think because you're all next to each other anyway. So the buddy's in it right next to you. All the bullets are coming in your general direction. But it's player-centric. They're not distracting themselves. They're not going off and getting the buddies. It's all on the player. Cheating. So this is the time we did have to cheat. Throughout most of the development of the game, the NPCs were able to see the buddy. So if she ran out of cover stupidly, she would be seen, she would break stealth, search would start, gunplay would start, etc. And this was great. This pushed us to polish the covering and the following as much as possible. But ultimately it came down to a few weeks before ship, this was not the right way to go. So we had to make this decision. Either we were going to be true to our no cheating rule and the buddies were going to give you away, or they were not going to be able to see a buddy out of combat. And there was an obvious choice. We couldn't even take the first choice here. We're player favoring here. We don't want you to ever hate the buddy. So if the buddy would jump out of cover and give you away, or shoot and give you away, you could see the YouTubers immediately saying, fuck you, Ellie. And at that point, we'd broken the relationship between Ellie and the player, and that was something we never wanted to do. So we didn't want her to be resented. We wanted to keep her as a beautiful entity. So she will run out, and she will not be seen, but it's better than the alternative. And I have the Penny Arcade comic framed and signed at home in my living room. So, okay, further work. Well, there was obviously a bunch of stuff we could have done. I said we had 4 or 5 months to do this. We only did a month of coding, I guess 6 weeks of coding. There were some little things we thought about to add to it, but ultimately we decided it wasn't time for these things. I don't know how much we would have added, but we decided to invest the time in polishing what we had, and we were very, very proud about what we ended up with. I'm going to run through them in case you're interested in them. But we had these things called exposure maps, which basically are what the NPCs can see at any time. And we were like, well, we could have Ellie never run across an exposed area. We actually tried it. It didn't add much to it. So we cut that. Teleporting. We'd said we didn't want to teleport But we decided there were some very small subsets of times you could. When she's really far away for whatever reason, we could do an intelligent teleport, bring her forward, make sure you can't hear her at the start or end, try and do it in a realistic time frame. But again, we decided not to. And number 3, something we actually, again, tried. I found out Monday we actually tried this. Someone else did it. We were going to direct the enemies to look away from the player, from the buddy. So if the buddy's in cover and there's an enemy coming towards her, he's like, oh, just kidding, and turns away and walks away. But this actually changed how search worked and how the player was experiencing the game, because he's also there covering nearby, and suddenly the NPC is not going where they think they should be going. So again, we decided not to go with that. So at this point, we had a robust, balanced, and fun companion AI. There were a bunch of little things we decided to add to the game, just to make it come a bit more alive. So I mentioned these traversal action packs. They were awesome for NPCs. They're really pretty fluid. But there were some issues when you started seeing the buddies up close using these things. So my coworker, John Bellamy, the animation guru, and we spent just weeks, I kid you not, looking at this one 15-second section of Tess and Ellie jumping over a car, and that was it. And at the beginning of it, they would jump up, stop, jump down, stop, and walk on. And at the end of it, it's all one fluid motion. With blending all these animations together, we blend out of the exit, we blend into the entry earlier. We have ground adjustment, because we're not jumping onto flat surfaces, we're jumping onto angles all over the place. And this really helped. It's hard to overstate how important this was. Like, it slowed them down by all this stopping. It made them seem ungrounded in the world. And just this 3 weeks, or however long it was, of looking at this 15-second section was invaluable to polishing their quality. This is actually one of the spaces we have. You can kind of see it's all tilted and angles are messed up, and they even like cut into the edge right here. And this was where we used our test case for jumping to angled surfaces. Unfortunately, this was applicable to the entire game, and all the NPCs got to use the same new code, and it was an awesome addition. Vocalizations. We added a huge list of hooks for this, and Jason Gregory had a talk this morning, I think, about the vocalizations, so I'll just run over it very quickly. We had some number of thousand lines of vocalizations, which were very specific to things that have been happening in the battles recently. So if you killed a guy with fire, Ellie would say, holy shit, that's disgusting. If you had got away very closely, she would say, crap, that was close. If she killed somebody for you, or if she'd saved your life, she would like say, hey, wasn't I awesome? Please thank me. And as soon as these started going on, it really gave her character. Like, you cared about what she was doing, and you remembered back to, oh yeah, you did save my life. I remember that. And so it was like reminding the player in this lull in combat what had just gone on previously, reinforced what she'd been doing, reinforced the skills we'd put in her hands. We also made her progress her attitude across the game. So it's, again, 16 hours of gameplay. She's with you for most of, like, 12 hours of that. So she actually has a progression where at the beginning she's all this timid child, and at the end she's this timid child, but she's a more confident child, and she's swearing more, and she's happier with Joel, and their relationship is cool. And it was subtle, and it went across the game, but it was pretty cool. This final bullet point here is something I'm really proud of. I think is one of the best things in the game, where we're watching playtests, and you punch someone, throw them up against a wall, they fall to the ground, pull out a shotgun, and you shoot them in the face, and they explode. And the player exclaims, holy shit. And it's a gruesome thing which happened, and we're not trying to glorify it, but you say, holy shit. And then a few seconds later, Ellie says, holy shit, too. And this was reinforcing the fact that she is, in my opinion, your avatar in the world. She's representing what you're seeing of the world. And that was accidental, but it worked. Callouts. These are really cool, and they were the last thing we added. Bruce was bugging me about this, but basically, you could get crept up on really easily by bad guys because Travis made their AI so good. They would flank you in perfect cover and come up behind you. You had no idea they were there. So Ellie, we decided, can see them, and she's going to tell you about them. So she acts almost like that little target finder you have on FPS games. We had very little UI, but she suddenly is this piece of UI. She's not doing something herself, but she's enabling your tool set to be larger. It gives you this extra combat awareness, and it's really important we found that it was high quality. And Evan kept on calling me up and saying, she just called out that there's someone here and I don't see them. And this would happen for weeks and weeks. And we ultimately decided that we needed to dial it back as much as possible. Like, you needed to, if she called someone out, you had to be able to turn around and see them in clear view about to kill you. And once we had that, it was awesome. Like, the information was 100% valid. It wasn't like you were never unsure of what you were saying, and you really were thankful for what she was doing for you at this point. This was building the relationship so good. And all these things now sort of came together when we added this, where you would be in cover, and she would say, "Shit, Joel, watch out behind you." And you'd spin around, and there's a runner running at you, and he pushes you up against the wall, and you don't quite get away. And then she stabs him in the back and pulls him off you, and you finish him off together. And then she says something smarmy. But the first time I saw that happen, I was so excited, and it was the cheering moment. So there's a lot of ambient areas in the game, too. I'm going to run through this pretty quickly. There are lots of scripted dialogue stuff, but we also had our animators came up with a bunch of idle animations like fixing the hair and fixing her shoes, and she has a knife she cleans. And as soon as these came online, like we went from being this static character in the world to being someone who, even though there was only a few dozen, if that, animations, she suddenly was being a real character in the world. We also, literally 2 weeks before we shipped, decided we needed something like 24 more dialogue hooks. And we gave Ashley Johnson, "Hey, can you go away and start whistling a lot for us?" And she actually came back with these like whistles and air guitars and spaceship noises and humming, and that all went into the game. And it's this like really cool thing. Like if you're walking around and you're looking at stuff, you're humming or you're whistling or you're air guitaring. I was very pleased with that. And it's still like 2 weeks, if that, to implement, record all this stuff, and it added a huge amount of feel to the game. So another ambient thing we added was this explore idea, where the player has a huge space to explore. The buddies don't just want to stand in the corner playing idle animations. They look kind of bored. So I whipped up this thing. I'll do the next slide. It's called Explore. It's pretty simple. You just scatter points across the world and say, "Hey, explore with these." They could be cinematic action packs. They could be points to look at, points of interest. They could be things with scripts on to go and do them. And all the buddies were just like, "Oh, cool, we're going to go explore." They'd walk around and explore for you. The designers really love this. If you want to make your designers happy, put this in your game. They went away and filled the whole world with it. This is a teeny little thing. A lot of people forget looking, and you have a head, and they'll look at stuff which they're scripted to look at, but it's kind of boring. So we added very simple looking. We decided to look at movement. Like if you're a human being, you look at movement. I look at the guy walking past there right now. So we decided if a player is moving near you or another buddy or another character is moving, she's going to look at them, just very briefly. So if you come to a stop, she'll look at you and then look back at what she was looking at before. If you walk past in the distance, she's going to glance at you and look past it. And this gives a lot of just believability to what she's doing in the world. We also then overlay a little figure of 8 sort of gaze onto it, just to make it a bit less static. I think this is finally. We have a lot of multiple buddies in the game. There's one area we have 3 buddies. There's Sam, Henry, and Ellie all following you. It's surprisingly easy, actually. The way the follow system was set up, we actually had Sam following Henry, or possibly the other way around. I get them confused. And Ellie following the player, and then Sam or Henry following the player. So it was this like chain of people following each other. And this was one other small place where we cheated, where if one buddy's blocking another one, after some amount of time, we turn off the nav blocker on them. And basically, they can clip through their navigation very briefly. And in practice, you never even see it because they go so quickly through them. We also, the taps I mentioned, the traversal action packs, we also decided we needed to place multiple taps. So there's a block to jump over. If you have one, they start bottlenecking on it. So we place multiple taps over it. Summary. It was awesome. I'm going to get really cliched here. But basically, we decided to treat her as a person. To me, Ellie is my second child, and everything I did about her, I was thinking about what she was going through as a character and as a human being in this world. I tried to think what her relationship with Joel and the enemies would be, and if I was a person in this world, what I would be doing if I was a 14-year-old girl, which has never been true. All the stuff we had before was extremely useful, too. I mean, there was a year of work beforehand, and it taught us that the most important thing, next slide, the most important thing is staying close to the player. Even before we had any combat utility built in, when they were just following you around, they felt like these awesome characters in the world. Their movement was smooth, and they were sticking close to you, and it was dynamic. You could go wherever the hell you wanted. They would follow you, and it was great. Number 2, you've got to tune all your stuff really hard. Like, I can't overstate how much this is. I don't consider anything we did that impressive from a technical standpoint. But Bruce and I and the whole of Naughty Dog has this manic obsession with detail. And we would spend weeks looking at what I call Diablo mode, where the camera is up above the world, just watching me running around the world with Ellie following. And she wasn't quite right, so I'd stop, break in, figure out what's wrong, and repeat for a week. These really big timers, I mentioned it earlier, but we have these really big timers on things like the brick throws and the gifting and voxes. There's voxes which only play every 3 hours, I think. It's a 16-hour game. If she saves you from a grapple, stabs someone in the back, pulls them off you, and she does it once in the whole game, you're going to remember the shit out of that moment and tell all your friends about it, and it's going to be amazing. If she does it all the time, it devalues its case completely. And there was the big decision, avoid breaking stealth. We're making a game here. We want realism as much as possible. We don't want to make it not fun for the player. It was the hardest decision we had to make for the game, but it was the right one to do. At the end, there's a ton of other talks which you missed or didn't miss about our AI and graphics and stuff. They will be on the web soon, I'm sure. There was design, art, all that junk. It was great. Questions? Anybody? Questions? None? How was that good? You've got 8 minutes. No? Well, thank you.
I'll ask a question.
Oh.
It seemed like for your talk and for the combat talk that came earlier, both of you guys had a period about 5 months before the end where you kind of threw away everything and like restarted and got to where it was really awesome. Is that a coincidence? And like, why do you think that happened? What happened before that?
I'm not sure. I mean, you may be mentioning the Melee talk specifically. Yeah. So I think Anthony mentioned the same thing. It was this press demo we had. It was the first time we were going to show the game to the world. And I'd only been at Naughty Dog a few months at that point. And I thought the game was pretty sweet, but it had been incubated, and we hadn't considered like outside eyes on it. We wanted it to be fun and perfect, and we also realized the time was ticking down, essentially. So that was it. There was this press demo. People were going to see it. We had to change everything up and make sure it didn't suck.
Okay. So the lesson is just have press demos all the time.
Yeah. Have it more than 5 months before ship, though. Yeah. That's my tip. Okay. Go.
Hey, I can appreciate your attention to detail and fine-tuning the AI for the environment, and it definitely came through in the game. I wonder, from a workflow standpoint, did you run into issues, excuse me, where maybe the designers would be doing something to do their own amount of fine-tuning that would then undercut maybe what you had done, forcing you to go back? Were there issues?
Sure. So did we go in conflict with designers and their fine-tuning? I have to say, mostly no, fortunately. The designers were, I mean, we talked a lot about what we were doing, and it was generally my opinion. I tried to make myself very open to them, saying, if there's something you want, come to me first. We'll see if there's a systematic way of doing it. Or if there isn't a systematic way of doing it, how we can do it to make sure that we don't screw up across the game. One example, we had firing parameters. They would go in and tweak the firing parameters a little bit, the rates, and that broke things occasionally. But we'd open up and we'd talk to them about, this is the wrong thing to do. We don't want them to fire this slowly. It looks bad. And they agreed. So no, we never really conflicted that much.
Great,
thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to ask a little bit more about how, like, did it change how you approached Ellie, knowing that the player would take her over at certain points, like particularly in Left Behind? Did that in any way change how you dealt with her? Obviously, she was no longer an AI, but like.
Honestly, for me, no. I think that our work to try and make her a character, an actual human being, as opposed to this AI character, meant that when you did do the jump into her, it never felt awkward, I hope. But no, honestly, that never influenced me. I never even thought about that, so good job.
Thanks.
Yes, so you had that generated cover system. Why use it for the buddy, and why not have the buddy use the covers that are already placed there?
I thought I said, maybe I forgot, but the covers which were already placed were way too sparse. They were not accurate enough to cover the entire space. There were some separation through the environment. They were 5 meters apart. We wanted them on the player at all times, if possible. I guess we could have generated more, but that would be a different problem. So.
Hi, yeah. So you're talking about how you're working with the designers to do the AI, and there's always that balance between the design and the programming side of the AI.
Right.
How did you kind of, in the end, was it more of an emergent AI system that came, or a designed AI system that came out like in real time?
That's a great question. Is it designed or emergent AI system? I hope it's both. I mean, Bruce and I certainly designed a lot of it. He's the game director. He would come by my desk every day, and we'd talk about things we wanted Ellie to be doing or that he'd seen happen badly. And we would sit down with little blocks, and we'd walk around together through a room and try and design what we're doing. But at the same time, when things worked perfectly and worked together, it was absolutely emergent. And the sort of things where she would brick someone who was about to hit you from behind and then warn about them, and you'd spin around and kill them, we didn't design for that. Like, that was, I guess we designed with the hope that that would happen, but it was never intentional. So it was absolutely emergent. Thank you.
There's a bunch of scenes in the game where there's more than one AI on screen.
Right.
Can you talk quickly to different rules you had to establish? Or different
Sure. I meant to, thank you, actually. I meant to mention this. So Ellie, we always have super close to the player. The other buddies, they can spread out way more. Like Tess is a grown-up, Bill is a grown-up, Henry's a grown-up. They all have way more relaxed following parameters. So if you're moving around, they're happy to stay further back. We still want them close so you don't forget about their existence, but they don't need to be in your ass, essentially. And they're also happier to fire. They have faster fire rates slightly. They actually don't gift you stuff because we didn't want to build that kind of relationship with them. It wasn't necessary. It was a special thing for Ellie. But otherwise, it was all the same code, just some different data values for them, essentially. Thank you.
So a lot of the AI you're talking about was procedurally generated, it sounds like. Were there any points in the game where you're like, okay, I really want this to be scripted, like I really want Ellie to do this?
Sure. There were absolutely scripted sections, and I should have mentioned them too. They were, the interaction between the scripted systems and the procedural systems, the handoff, we tried to make as smoothly as possible. There are certainly some bits where she needs to be in a very specific location or looking at something or saying stuff, and the designer would just say, hey, I need her right here, turn off her brain for a little bit, do some scripted movement. And all this would tie into the same locomotion, the same Vox system, the same vocalizations, and all the animations, so it looked very smooth, obviously. And again, I mentioned before, if they haven't had a requirement, they're like, hey, we want to do this special thing, I would try and do it systematically first. So the explore thing I mentioned, we had a designer who'd set up an explore section with thousands of lines of script, and ultimately I was like, I can do it for you in a day, and put it in there, and it was used across the entire game by everybody. So
Cool, thanks.
that guy was first.
Hi,
Hi.
Ryan Miller. I wanted to ask you, because you're aiming to make her so human-like, was there ever a moment that it crossed this boundary where you actually started to, like, this one defining moment where you're like, oh my God, she's human-like? Like, you had an emotional reaction to it, and you kind of realized, oh my gosh, she's human.
As far as I'm concerned, she was always human. I think that when she started looking really human was when she was reliably following. Like, she wasn't even vocalizing or shooting. It was, we had her reliably with you, believably moving through the environment and trying to avoid the bad guys. That, to me, was when, it wasn't an emotional moment, but to me, she felt real at that point. So, definitely.
Thank you, Max.
Thank you.
I have 2 questions. First one is about cinematic kills in a previous talk.
You may only have one question.
Okay. In that case, this is the right question. You have multiple positions where the camera could possibly be in a cinematic kill. Would they be invalidated if Ellie was taking the place of one of them? And also, did you have any special rule where she wasn't moving in a cinematic kill because she could possibly invalidate more than one position?
Sure. So actually, spoilers, we actually hide everybody when the cinematic kill happens. You mean when the player's having his neck munched by someone? Mm-hmm. Yeah, all the other NPCs are hidden at this point. So it was actually a pretty obvious thing when we decided to do it. It's like, there's no need for them to be there. We want to focus on this death that's happening. We literally just invisibilize everybody. So, with hilarious effects sometimes, but it normally works. I think maybe one more. Yes, one more question.
Yeah, I just think the whole bit where the bodies always follow you, but the camera's generally fairly close.
Right.
And the camera looks forwards. So
Yes.
Did you ever do anything to make them walk into shot deliberately, just so, or just rely on like luck and audio?
That's a great question. So this is, did we ever try and get them in shot? And I think, I can't talk to this, I think that the camera is actually further out in an ambient space, so it's a little better if they're following you. But we actually did spend some time iterating on what we call the lead behavior instead of a follow one, where the buddy would be given this goal essentially to get to in the world, and the follow region would then be sort of in front of the player, leading you in that direction instead. And I mentioned briefly, like, we didn't want her in front of you. It was good for thematic reasons, so she is there, so you remember her. But it's bad because she's in your way. Like, you're the one exploring the space. You're the one that wants to be moving through and leading the party, essentially. And I guess also she's a little kid, and walking through an abandoned town with zombies, and she's point kind of makes no sense. But we absolutely tried it. It didn't work for us. So thanks. We good? Thank you.